Welcome back. And now for the news in detail. Yemen's government and southern separatists have signed a power-sharing deal to end their long-running conflict. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman announced the agreement on state TV. Speaking in Riyadh, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman said the agreement is a step towards a political solution to end the war in Yemen. UN Special Envoy Martin Griffiths has welcomed the move. Under the deal, the Southern Transitional Council will reportedly be given a number of ministries in the government. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says it will resume uranium enrichment at an underground plant south of Tehran. Rouhani's statement follows yesterday's latest US sanctions on his country. Tehran says the plant will begin enriching uranium with immediate effect. The Iranian government closed the Fordo plant near the city of Qom in exchange for the lifting of international sanctions as agreed on in the 2015 nuclear deal. But Washington abandoned the deal in May last year and imposed crippling sanctions on Iran shortly after. Yesterday, the US imposed new sanctions on 9 people and a company linked to Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Iran began a phased suspension of its own commitments in May this year. At least 5 more protesters have been shot dead during clashes with security forces in southern Iraq. This brings the death toll to over 260 since the protests against corruption and unemployment began last month. Details in this report.
Despite its oil wealth, people in Iraq are forced to live in poverty with limited access to clean water, electricity, healthcare, and education. Protesters blame the country's political system for making the sorry state of affairs. Security forces are using heavy-handed tactics to take on the angry protesters.
3 protesters were killed and so many others were injured. We don't know the number as they continue fighting.
Authorities have once again imposed internet restrictions in most part of the country to quell protests.
They are pushing demonstrators towards violence. The protests are peaceful. They killed protesters last night, offended people, and pushed them towards violence. We are not aiming at bloodshed. This is their policy, the officials.
Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi has said he is willing to resign if politicians agree on a replacement, but protesters say that is not enough and the entire political class needs to go.
Moving on to India, where the Supreme Court rejects a government request to adjourn the hearing of a case regarding the illegal detention of minors in occupied Kashmir and sought a fresh report by the 3rd of December. The court said it can't delay the matter any further as it has been 3 months since the valley was locked down. In their plea, child rights activists Nakshi Ganguly and Shanta Sinha state the preventive detention of juveniles is barred under the law. Earlier, the Jammu and Kashmir Juvenile Justice Committee said 144 children were detained since India imposed a curfew on 5th of August. International media has repeatedly raised the issue of minors being illegally detained by Indian forces in the valley. Kashmiris have been under India's lockdown and communication blackout for over 90 days now. In occupied Kashmir, Indian Congress has called for mass protests to force New Delhi to undo its illegal annexation of occupied Kashmir. Speaking in Jammu, Congress leader Vikram Malhotra said BJP government has jeopardized the future of Kashmiris. He said New Delhi has failed to address the ongoing plight in Kashmir. Meanwhile, 5 workers killed by Indian agencies were remembered at a candlelight march in Kolkata. Protesters at Vigil demanded an inquiry into the killing of 5 workers in the occupied valley. They died in Kulgam district last week. West Bengal State Minister Shashi Panja and Indian Rajya Sabha member Santanu Sen led the demonstration. Urban Development Minister Farhad Hakim said repealing Article 370 has not done any good to Kashmir. Pakistan has sought answers from the UN's observer group about the impact of India's illegal annexation of occupied Kashmir. The world body's group monitors the line of control in the disputed state. The demand was made during an interactive dialogue with the group in the General Assembly's 5th Committee. India does not allow the UN observers to monitor the LOC, while Pakistan does. Pakistan has questioned the group's capability to function by lacking operational freedom in Indian-occupied Kashmir. It has urged the UN to share the findings of the visit to the disputed region conducted last year. The UN said it would respond to the questions raised by Pakistan in due course. Pakistan has expressed disappointment over the lack of acknowledgement of its massive contribution to counter-terrorism. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry said Washington's recent country reports overlooks the country's 2-decade-long struggle against terrorism. It said Pakistan's efforts have not only led to Al-Qaeda's elimination from the region, but have also made the world a safer place. It said Islamabad has taken concrete steps under UNSC resolutions against terror financing. Afghanistan's chief executive Abdullah Abdullah has dismissed a new peace proposal by President Ashraf Ghani as an unrealistic wish list. He also questioned the validity of thousands of votes from recent polls. US President Donald Trump ended year-long talks with the Taliban in September amid ongoing violence. Last month, President Ghani's team released a 7-point proposal meant to build on those talks and bring an end to the war with the Taliban. In an interview, Abdullah Abdullah termed the so-called 7-point plan a naive wish list. The US-Taliban negotiations were centered on the Pentagon pulling out its troops in return for security guarantees from the Taliban. But the move was disapproved by President Ghani's government, which was systematically cut out because the Taliban do not recognize it as legitimate. Abdullah said it is imperative for any future talks to include negotiators from the Afghan government, be it led by him or by Ghani. Turkey says Kurdish fighters have not withdrawn from its planned safe zone in northeast Syria, despite assurances by the US and Russia. President Tayyip Erdogan said Ankara will only abide by the ceasefire if the US and Russia keep their promises. More in this report.
Ankara wants to establish a 30-kilometer safe zone inside Syria for the safe return of nearly 2 million refugees. It struck 2 separate deals with the US and Russia for the Kurdish fighters to clear the region. But President Erdogan doubts Washington and the Kremlin are upholding their end of the deal. Speaking in Ankara, he said the area has not been cleared of militants yet.
We know that on both sides, terrorists are still present within the borders of the area that we established as a safe zone. They cannot deceive us by saying we removed the terrorists from there.
President Erdogan said US troops are still holding patrols with Kurdish fighters in northern Syria.
How can we explain America holding patrols with terrorist organizations in this region, even though they made the decision to withdraw? This is not in our agreement.
Meanwhile, Turkish and Russian troops have started their second joint ground patrols in the Anal Arab region as part of the deal.
The US says it wants to strike a new arms control deal with Russia, China and other countries. Speaking at the White House, President Donald Trump said the arms control treaty will also include nuclear weapons. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said Moscow's response will depend on the nature of the US proposals. But Trump did not say if Washington will extend the new strategic arms reduction treaty or New START with Russia. New START is the only nuclear treaty between the US and Russia, and it will end in 2 years. Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned of a new nuclear arms race if Washington fails to extend the pact. President Xi Jinping has pledged to open China's economy further a day after Beijing and 14 other leading Asia-Pacific nations agreed on a free trade deal. The Chinese president was speaking at the opening session of the China International Import Expo in Shanghai. Speaking amid ongoing trade negotiations between the US and China, Xi Jinping called on the world to knock down walls instead of building them. Addressing an audience including French President Emmanuel Macron, Xi Jinping pressed the international community to oppose protectionism and reduce trade barriers. For more on this story, we are joined from Beijing by our correspondent, Patrick Fogg. Patrick, following the agreement of 15 countries on the RCEP free trade deal in Bangkok yesterday, China looks to have seized the economic advantage over the US and India in Asia. How do you expect that to reflect in China's trade negotiations with the US?
Well, certainly this is positive news for China. From the American perspective, it's unlikely to change the negotiations in any meaningful way as far as the Americans are concerned. And we got an idea about this from White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow over the weekend. It is more or less a done deal, the phase one of this trade agreement. He said that the agricultural chapter was virtually completed, and that would include not only an increase in purchases of US farm goods by China, but also the removal of barriers and what he called some sort of difficult regulations that would essentially make it easier for US farmers to access the Chinese market. He said that on currency stability, that was virtually wrapped up. And he also said on the ability for American financial services companies to own 100% of operations in China. He said that was virtually wrapped up as well. So like I say, as far as the Americans are concerned, the deal is more or less done. And all that remains to be done now is for the two sides to come together and sign on the dotted line. From the Chinese perspective, though, we are hearing reports that as part of this deal, the Chinese are expecting the Americans to remove the tariffs that were due to kick in on December 15th. Now, there are reports that have emerged overnight saying that China is now pushing for further tariffs to be removed, specifically some of the tariffs that had been implemented in September. And there is an argument that this may have emboldened China to some extent to push for further concessions. At the end of the day, remember, this RCEP deal, even without India, includes 1/3 of the world's population. So there is an argument that China doesn't need to rely on the US to any extent. But at the same time, China will be wanting some sort of immediate improvement to its economic situation. And that does depend on the US coming to some sort of trade agreement with it. And so it is difficult to see this changing these negotiations in any meaningful way in the short term. With regards to a longer term agreement, it may have further impact, I suppose.
Thank you, Patrick. We were talking to our Beijing correspondent, Patrick Fogg. Now, moving on, the US has formally notified the United Nations of its withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement. This makes the US the only country in the world opting out of the pact. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo submitted the paperwork to begin the year-long exit process. Pompeo said the agreement had imposed an unfair economic burden on the US. He said Washington has reduced all types of emissions regardless of the climate accord. The Trump administration has also pulled US funding that helps the developing world cut the emissions. For more on this, we are joined by our correspondent, Gillian Wolfe from New York. Thank you, Gillian, for your time. Despite being one of the biggest contributors to global warming, the US has formally announced its exit from the Paris Climate Accord. How will this impact the world's resolve to curb climate change?
Hi there. Yes, so this is obviously a big issue. Now, we must remember that this has an overarching theme. It's political. This is what the US President Donald Trump has been campaigning on since the start. He has said that he would pull out of the Paris climate deal, and it's something that has been, campaigned towards his base supporters. So it's something that's not news to us, but it's something that will take a year to go into effect. effect. So he requested the withdrawal to the Paris climate deal this week, and it will take a year to go into effect, and it will not be proper until it will not be official. Until a day after the U.S. election next year. Now that gives us 30 days to reverse the decision, and so really this is actually in the hands of the U.S. voters. If the U.S. votes for a new president, they will have the opportunity to reverse this decision within 30 days of next year's election on November 4th, 2020. So in essence, this is a critical moment for U.S. voters who will be going to the polls shortly, as the decision lies in their hands of the president that they choose to represent the country next year.
Gillian, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that the accord was hurting America's economy. How is that so? Could you shed a little bit of light on that?
That's correct. Secretary Mike Pompeo did mention that. He both tweeted and he released a statement today. He's saying that it hurts the U.S. economy. He's saying that the U.S. is proud with its record as a world leader in reducing all emissions, that it's growing our economy and ensuring energy for all our citizens, and that they have a realistic and pragmatic model. Now, that is despite the fact that the U.S. is actually the second biggest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. It has about 15% of carbon dioxide, and as a result, the criticism to this decision by both President Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has been swift and forceful. There's international condemnation from France saying that it regrets this decision. Chinese leaders say that the U.S. decision has added negative energy, and even here at home, the previous Vice President and climate campaigner President Al Gore said that no one person or party can stop our momentum to solve the climate crisis, but those who try will be remembered for their complacency, their complicity, and the mendacity in attempting to sacrifice the planet for their greed. So lots of swift criticism as a result of this decision.
And yes, President Donald Trump himself has already said that this accord was actually hurting America's economy. But on the other side, what we see, according to a certain White House report that was released last year, hundreds of scientists from 13 federal agencies warned that climate change could risk tens of thousands of American lives every year by the end of the century. So don't you think that Trump's administration seems oblivious to the imminent danger?
Well, that is what has been said by many critics, that the U.S. president, that this administration is oblivious to the imminent danger that has obviously been proved by some of the best climate scientists of our times. If you look at the United Nations General Assembly that just took place, there was a massive push by the Secretary General Antonio Guterres in the fight against climate change. If you're looking around the world, we're seeing teen activists that are standing up, that are leading marches all around the world to fight and combat climate change. So yes, that is something that is being said by the critics, that this current administration is ignorant and if not oblivious to the impeding effects of climate change. And you're seeing it around the world, not only just in the U.S. with the wildfires in California, the hurricanes that are coming across the Caribbean. You're seeing it all over the world. So it's something that is very clear and obvious, not just by facts led by scientists, but also you can see it before your very eyes, occurring in front of our eyes right now. But it's something that, despite the fact that the U.S. is pulling out of this climate accord currently, it's something that the rest of the world will continue to move forward on, and also the U.S. as well. Americans here are very vocal about climate change and their push towards renewable energy sources. They're very vocal about this fight. So there is definitely a disparity between the stance where the U.S. White House stands in its perception of climate change and the U.S. public in general.
Gillian Wolf, our correspondent from New York, thank you very much for updating us regarding what exactly has happened and what exactly is going to be the hurdle regarding the fight of the global community against the climate change after US has withdrawn from its Paris Climate Agreement. And here we'll take a short break, and after the short break, more stories to follow. Stay tuned with the news. Welcome back. Britain's opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn says Prime Minister Boris Johnson is seeking to hijack Brexit to slash workers' rights. The Labour Party leader added the Prime Minister is pushing the UK towards the American economic model. Corbyn accused the Prime Minister of wanting to hijack Brexit to unleash Thatcherism on steroids. Former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher is a hated figure in many of the working class communities that voted in 2016 to leave the EU. Prime Minister Johnson is hoping to win seats from Labour in those communities to build a pro-Brexit majority. Speaking at an event in Essex, Corbyn promised to get Brexit done within 6 months.
The Tories have failed on Brexit for 3 years. A Labour government will get Brexit sorted within 6 months by giving you, the British people, the final say.
Meanwhile, Britain's cabinet met for a final time before election campaigning kicks off. The UK Parliament is set to be dissolved in the early hours of Wednesday to allow parties to campaign for the 12th of December vote. Now moving on to Chile. Protesters have clashed with police and looted stores as anti-government demonstrations entered their third week. Tens of thousands of people gathered in Santiago to protest economic inequality and other issues. Clashes erupted when police tried to stop the advancing protesters from marching on the presidential palace. Police fired tear gas and water cannons at the protesters, who responded with the petrol bombs. The demonstrators set barricades on fire, while vandalism was reported in the cities of Valparaiso and Concepcion. Meanwhile, in an interview, President Sebastián Piñera has said he will not resign despite mass anti-government protests. In the United States, 462 inmates have been released from prisons in a single day across Oklahoma. New Republican Governor Kevin Stitt signed a bill approving the largest commutation in the U.S. history. The bill retroactively applied to misdemeanor sentences for simple drug possession and low-level property crimes. The inmates serve 3 years on average and will leave prison 16 months early. The released inmates thanked the state for giving them another shot at life.
You know, I've been out of her life for 3 years, but she's my hope. She's never given up on me. So it's a great opportunity for a lot of women out there. And all I have to say is thank you.
The governor's office said the move will save Oklahoma almost $12 million. Now moving on, U.S. President Donald Trump says he wants to wage a war on Mexican drug cartels. On Monday, at least 9 U.S. citizens, including 6 children, were killed by suspected drug cartel gunmen in northern Mexico. President Trump said the U.S. is willing to get involved and do the job effectively. Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador says he will talk to President Trump about cooperating in response to the massacre. The victims are members of the Lee Barron family linked to a breakaway Mormon community which settled in Mexico several decades ago. The ambush occurred in Rancho de la Mora, in an area along the border between the states of Sonora and Chihuahua. The area is notorious as a hub of drug traffickers and bandits. The Mexican government has launched an investigation into the incident. In India's western state of Maharashtra, recent government data has revealed suicide rates among female farmers has doubled over the past 4 years. Over 30,000 farmers have ended their lives during a decades-long agrarian crisis in India. A vicious death cycle is forcing women to take their lives as farm duties grow. The data shows 22 women took their own lives in the Amravati district alone since 2018. It suggests farmer suicide doubled to 12,000 in the last 4 years. Formal loans lent by the state government account for 80% of the total outstanding debt in Maharashtra. Facebook has unveiled a new logo to distinguish the company from its different acquisitions. The move aims to highlight the parent company, which operates a range of different apps such as Messenger, Instagram, and WhatsApp. The logo features the word Facebook in capital letters, displaying different colors to represent its apps. The social media company plans to use the new logo on products and marketing materials. In June, it began adding the words from Facebook across each of its properties. China has successfully launched the 49th satellite in its Beidou navigation satellite system. It was launched into space from the Xichang Satellite Launch Center in southwest Sichuan province. It is the 24th and the last satellite of the BDS-3 system, a global geolocation network. Over 300 research units and tens of thousands of personnel have worked on the project in the last 2 years to complete 16 satellite launch missions. Today's launch was the 317th mission for China's Long March rockets. In eastern Germany, the Urban Culture Project is reviving aging buildings by painting vibrant graffiti and murals. The project hopes to promote social cohesion among residents who are likely to belong to disadvantaged sectors of society. This report tells you more.
A three-dimensional mural on towers from the communist era depicts an astronaut descending from a spaceship via a wooden ladder. In the background is a clear blue sky, giving the illusion that the walls have disappeared. By brightening up the dull facades of towers, often associated with poverty and tensions, artists aim to bring the people of eastern Germany closer.
We have specific themes. There is a common thread that guides us through all the stories we can see here. In principle, the message is that nothing lasts and everything changes.
Artist Philipp Kinast hopes that art can help strengthen community ties in Halle's the Plattenbau complexes, notorious for its high crime rate.
In the places where we paint, people generally don't have good social interactions with each other. When they look at our walls, they will approach each other and talk about art.
Once finished, the project worth $7 million will cover 8,000 square meters of wall space.
More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned with Industries. Wall Street futures have risen as hopes of a trade deal between Washington and Beijing strengthened investor confidence. Optimism of the resolution of the US-China trade war and the third quarter earnings season have landed stocks in positive territory. The Dow Jones Industrial Average Index has climbed 70 points. The S&P 500 and Nasdaq 100 indices have also edged up. Meanwhile, oil prices have also soared as Brent crude futures have gone up 51 cents. Time to take a look at the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.